Hi, I'm Dr. J. Reyes, Superintendent of Scottsboro City Schools. Today I'd like to welcome you to the campus of Caldwell Elementary, and we're here in the library today to discuss some questions and concerns that we've got over the past week concerning our configuration options. Again, I'm glad for you to be here and would love for you to take a few moments to listen to those things as I address some of the questions and concerns. As we start the conversation about reconfiguration, I want you to consider a few things. First of all, I want us to consider the population recap. We've done 3 community meetings at Nelson. We did it at Collins, the Page Administration Building, and at the high school. We had about 300 people come to those meetings, and we discussed the configuration options. We talked about the population, and so let's start there. I want to remind everyone that in about 1980, the population of the Scottsboro City Schools was somewhere around 3,500. Today, in 2018, we are at approximately 2,490. So as you can see, over a 38-year period, we've lost several students, and so this is kind of where we are. Now, we've had some questions about the capacities of buildings, so I want to jot that down for you very quickly. Currently, we have 6 schools, and at Brownwood, I'm going to write these down very quickly. At Brownwood, we currently have about 285 students, and the capacity of Brownwood is somewhere, and again, these are just rough estimates, again, because you can't tell from year to year, but what I can tell you is what we've had in these buildings in terms of the most that they've ever had. So at Brownwood, the most they've ever had is somewhere in the high 390s, 380s, 390s. At Nelson, we currently have about 270. At one time, Nelson housed 373 students, I believe is the exact number. At Caldwell, we currently have somewhere, I believe, in the 342-ish range, something like that. Actually, I think it's about 362. Again, a lot of these numbers are off the cuff. And then we can actually house somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 kids here at this particular campus. We also have SJHS and Collins. At one time, SJHS actually held over 600. I believe it was about 602, 604. And right now at SJHS, we have about 410. And at Collins, which was the old high school, it holds about 1,000 to 1,100, and currently we're at about approximately 345. So what you can see in terms of capacity is that we are, for the most part, in most of our buildings right now, we are somewhere within the 65 to 70% range capacity for some buildings, and then with Collins being the least in terms of capacity, we're somewhere around 35%. So again, those numbers do change a little bit daily because we have students, some enroll and some leave, but these are pretty good estimates about where we are right now. Now, we talked about 3 particular schools, and when we talked about reconfiguring and we talked about not using a school, we talked about in our meetings 3 schools, and those schools were Brownwood, Nelson, and we also talked about SJHS. Now, let me say something about those 3 schools, or the other 3 schools, and we talked about this in our meetings, is that we have the high school, we have Caldwell, and then also we have Collins. Now, our thought process was here. Those 3 that I just mentioned, those were 3 campuses that we could not lose. They had to stay where they are. Now, why would that be? Well, obviously the high school was built and started, actually students began in 1999, so that is our second youngest school. At Caldwell, this building was ready in about 2005, and then also when we talk about the junior high, when we talk about Collins, we know that Collins is located in such a place that we've actually got to stay there. We've got the football field, we've got the track, we've got the field house, and it's just such in a very good area. We also have a hitting facility there close by the old tennis courts. We have also baseball fields that have been newly constructed. We have soccer fields close by, so those are all reasons why that would really need to stay right there. So again, these are really the only 3 options that we had in terms of potential schools that we could close, or we can consolidate and vacate and use it in another manner. So this is kind of where we are, and we'll go back to age and things of that nature of the buildings once we get a little bit later into the presentation. Now, the question again would be, would options hold future growth? Well, the options that we had, let me jot those down very quickly. The options that we had were option 1, where we had a pre-K and a K, a 1-3, a 4-6, a 7-8, and a 9-12. Now again, if you'll just follow me along, because I won't write all of these, this would be at Nelson, Caldwell, Collins, the junior high, and the high school. Option 2 would be the same pre-K and K at Nelson. It would be 1-3, and that would be also here at Caldwell. And then we had a 4-5 and a 6-8 and a 9-12. Now these are the two options, excuse me, the two differences in the options. And they were actually saying that we could potentially put 4 and 5 at the junior high, and then 6 through 8 would actually be at Collins. Now, this particular item here, actually, it's my understanding that in the past it was potentially, when we actually first moved to Collins, that it was a potential option at that time to put the 4th grade there. They chose not to. I don't exactly know the whys, but that's how we did it. But here, what we're saying is this 6-8, we like this, or there's a positive about this. We actually like both of them for different reasons. The positive I think about this is Collins is an old high school, and where else better to have a junior high than an old high school? It makes sense. Now, I'm not, again, and as your superintendent, I have concerns and fears of both. But the 4th and 5th at the junior high, that's more of a secondary building. So while these are not early elementary, I think they would be okay there. But again, I think the best about this one is that we get a 6-8 at an old high school, which is what most people use an old high school for. But this one, on the other hand, would be a much easier transition, less movement by students, less movement by teachers. So again, they both hold positives and they both hold negatives. But again, they move us towards matching what's happening with our population. So that's kind of the two options that we have right now. And then asking again, would they hold future growth? What we see here is that pre-K and K, I'll just give you a quick rundown. Pre-K and K currently, with a pre-K and K, we have about 199 students in our K, and then about 54 in our pre-K. So we're looking at about 250, 255 students at a Nelson configuration. And then the 1 through 3 at Caldwell, we can hold approximately 600. Now please remember that that's taking the number of rooms, about 30 times 20, which is 600. But everyone understands that in the school system, that's just how you would try to calculate that, because we know, especially in 3rd and 4th grade, you have more than 20 kids in a room. Most of the time you have 23 to 25. So it would hold a little bit more. Now, all of the other 4 through 6, we're fine at Collins. That would be a 1,000 kid school. Maybe 600 max would be there. The 7th and 8th already works itself out. And of course, the high school's fine. In this configuration, we have the same issues here, but those work out good number-wise. The junior high obviously has held 600. It could hold 400. And then, of course, Collins with 6, 7, and 8. If we did this, then it would obviously hold that as well. You're talking about 600 kids in a building for 1,000. All right, now, the use of a vacant school. Well, in both scenarios, Brownwood would be the school that would be vacated. So what we thought about here is, obviously, we don't want to not use this school. Now, as your superintendent, I've had several community organizations that are looking for a place to go, looking for a place to house their organization, and the majority of those organizations are organizations that help people in Scottsboro City and also in Jackson County. Again, I've spoken with the mayor a few times. We've talked about some possibilities as this has kind of come to fruition. And we really believe that we can use this, repurpose this for some things that will help the community. I know many of the schools, one in particular that I visited recently for a meeting in Huntsville. It was an old school, and they've transformed it into restaurants. They also are meeting areas in that building. So they've taken the building and they actually have a use for it for the community. So again, this would be a school that if we did either of the configurations, that we would look to use it to help the community. And again, we've already talked about the capacity. I've had a question of what if jobs come, and we certainly hope that jobs do come. but we're in good shape in terms of capacity, because remember, over a 38-year period, we've lost about 1,000 students, and we've talked about back in 1980 in the community meetings, we talked about the number of industries that were here. Now, we certainly won't, we'd love to get a big one, we'd love to get a big industry, but to have 1,000 kids show up, I'm not sure that that's really realistic, but if we had 300-400 kids distributed out through those schools, we would be more than fine in terms of capacity. Now, what do other school systems do? Well, quite frankly, there are really no standard options for school systems. You see school systems that have numerous amounts of configurations, but what I will say is most of those configurations that you see today have a lot to do with past decisions. So we don't know exactly the decisions in other communities, but past decisions does shape the configuration that you have for your school system. But what I will say is what I did was just to check. Again, in the Scottsboro City school systems, we have about 2,500 kids, actually 2,490, but I'm going to round that. So what we have is 2,500 kids. Now, what I did was, is I went and I said, well, let's take about 1,000 more than us and 1,000 less than us. And so what I did was, is I found about 26 schools, city school systems, that were about 1,000 above and 1,000 below us. And out of those particular schools, 19 of the 26 had a configuration, not necessarily just like this, but they did have a configuration where all of the grades are actually in the same building. Now again, those other 6, if you'd like to come see me, we could talk about those. Again, I don't know the decisions why. They're not configured with all grades, but 19 out of 26 is pretty strong in terms of how they're configured. And in small communities, you're really able to do that a little bit better, because as you get bigger in terms of the number of students there, then what you have to worry about more and more is about traffic, and I'll actually discuss that later. Now, we talked about, if you give me a second, let me erase a few things here. We talked about transportation with quite a few questions about transportation. Now, in terms of transportation, one of the questions is starting times. Well, currently in the configuration that we have, the starting times are not all the same anyway. Neither are the ending times. And normally, regardless of what your configuration is, your starting and ending times are not going to be the same because of buses. So what we would say is this, is that if we change into a different configuration, obviously there would have to be some modifications in when schools start and when schools finish. Again, that's going to help us in terms of people taking kids to multiple schools and those type things. Now, bus routes, we've talked about that. Mr. Tony Ball, Mr. Greg Sharp, we have not gotten deep into that conversation because obviously these options have not been voted on. So currently we're going to stay doing exactly what we're doing until there's a potential change. But bus routes, we have very capable men of working on that. Distance between schools. One of the things that I've heard quite a bit is distance between schools. Well, I went to Google Maps today, and what I do like, and I really, I don't know who made these decisions, but I think a great decision was, if you start out at Nelson and you come down the 4-lane, you will hit Collins, you'll hit SJHS, and then you'll hit Caldwell. And the great thing about that is those are all within 4 miles of each other. I think that's wonderful. So again, I don't know who made the decision to put those schools where they did, but I really think that this was just brilliant in order to make sure that everybody's close by. So obviously there would be a little more time in terms of dropping off, but in terms of how far it is from Nelson all the way to Caldwell, you're only talking about 4 miles. So I think that's something that we could overcome very easy. And then changing schools for students, another, and this was something that the teachers brought out that I really hadn't thought a lot about, but we do have a lot of transient students that go from one elementary to another, and that's really traumatic on the kid in terms of changing to Brownwood, to Nelson, to Caldwell during the year. And again, students can't control what we as parents do. We as parents actually, whatever we do, then the kid obviously has to follow, the child has to follow. So that's one of the issues that concerns us a lot about students changing schools. So if they have a life change and they go to Caldwell, or they went to Brownwood, if they had a life change now, Then if they were in the second grade, they would stay at Caldwell. If they were in kindergarten, they would stay at Nelson, and that type of thing. If they were in the fourth grade, they would stay at Collins. So I think that's a very, very positive thing in terms of all of our grades being together. Now also we talk about dropping multiple students off. I've heard that was a concern. Well, I try to think of it from being a parent myself, and I can remember that I had, or let's just apply my particular situation as a parent and my wife's particular situation. So I would have had I would have had a sixth grader, a second grader, and a kindergartner. Now in the current particular situation for us, at this particular time, if our kids were this old, obviously a neighborhood school, we would go to the same school. I'd have to make 2 drop-offs. But what would happen is if we go 4 years later, and I had a younger daughter, so she didn't turn 16 until she was a junior, but if you go 4 years later, then what you've got is, let's do this, let's go 3 years later. Then I would have a 9th grader, a 5th grader, and a 3rd grader, so I would have to make 3 stops as well. So again, it really, however the schools are configured, out of those 26 schools that I discussed, they're all going to have different drop-offs. You're always going to have to go to different schools. I understand that a K-4 helps, especially in the younger ages. But again, that's something I think that we can all, because of the distance here, I think it's going to be something that we'll be able to work through very easily. Now, another question that we had was why pre-K and K? Well, a couple of comments I would have about pre-K and K is that really there are 2 grades, K-12, that actually are being more and more used as standalone grades. And those 2 grades are kindergarten and 9th grade. So those are 2 grades that you're seeing a lot more standalone because of the unique needs that each have. You see a lot of freshman academies starting to crop up, and you do see some more kindergarten-only schools. Again, if you've never been to a kindergarten school or never seen a kindergarten teacher, kindergartners are interesting people. So they have unique needs. And then we also think about matching that pre-K with the kindergarten. Now, why is that important to have a school like that? Well, one thing that's really come up lately in the education field is the need for pre-K. And as you know, we currently have 3 pre-K classes. Now, we don't know what the future holds, but I do know this, that the Governor Ivey, has asked for $23 million more, and she'll be asking that in the next few weeks for pre-K. What that tells me is that pre-K is going to be a priority in her administration. It was a priority in the previous governor's administration, and this is going to continue to be a priority. And what we want to be able to do is provide a space so that we can expand and potentially have more pre-K classes, because what that'll do is the more we can get in pre-K, the better it will do in terms of providing them with a good base. So again, we believe that pre-K is going to continue to move forward, and we want to make sure that we have space here for the pre-K. And by the way, currently, I think we have 12 or 13 kindergarten teachers, and we have 3 pre-K, so you're looking at 15, 16 homerooms if we're talking about a pre-K school. Let's see. We also talk about, redistricting. I've heard this, and again, I'm looking at some notes that I've got, but we've heard this from a couple of folks, and we talked about, this was an idea that was thrown out there. What if we did this? What if we had Caldwell and Nelson as the pre-K through 3 schools? Well, again, the problem is, and again, of no one's fault, but the problem is that Nelson's size, it actually is the smallest in terms of number of classrooms. Here at Caldwell, you have about 32-ish, 31, 32 rooms that could be used for a classroom. At Brownwood, you have about 26, 27, and at Nelson, you have about 22. So, of no one's fault, but Nelson is the smallest school. And if you were to take the Brownwood children, you would try to redistrict and put them into 2 schools, you're actually really getting very high here with capacity. That's also why we didn't consider a K-1 situation at Nelson. If you considered a K-1 situation at Nelson, you're getting up to about 400 kids, because we have in the lower grades anywhere from 180 to 200, and so that's putting a strain on Nelson as well. So that's kind of why that particular deal in terms of maybe doing neighborhood schools with those, we just didn't really feel comfortable with that. Now, one of the other things that's come up quite a bit is the Leader in Me program. Now, what I would say about the Leader in Me is that previously, and I was not aware of this until I did a little more research, we actually at one time did the Leader in Me in all K-4 schools. Now, for whatever reason, again, what happens a lot of times is when you change principals, they may want to go in a different direction. But I understand that this is a very, very important part of what we do at one particular school. That would be at Nelson, and I think they've done a great job. But what I would say is this: if we do either of the configurations, and again, that would either be a 1-5 or a 1-6 in terms of, now let me make sure I explain this to you, because this would be if we had a 6 through 8 school at Collins, we would stop at 5th grade. But if we had a 4-6 at Collins, then we could actually go Leader in Me 1st grade through 6th grade. So what I really like about this is we're taking something, and again, I'd say this in just a minute as well, but we can take all of what each school is best at, we can bring it together and make it better for everybody. So what I see in the future is, if we reconfigure, is I see a Leader in Me program 1 through 5. If we had the 6-8 option at Collins, I see a Leader in Me 1 through 6 if we had a 4-6 at Collins. Now, we do have the leadership in our school system that's very knowledgeable in this. We have 2 or 3 people that are really, really knowledgeable. And so for me, as your superintendent, this is important to me because it's important to you. So know that that will be something that we would consider. Now, we've also talked about horizontal alignment. We've said that many times. Now, basically, what horizontal alignment is all grades together, okay? And so either configuration would get all of our grades together. Horizontal alignment would do several things for us. Again, it would take the best of all the elementary schools and bring us together so that we can share, we can collaborate. You know, I've been really excited about the information and the comments we've gotten from our teachers. I think the majority of our teachers are really excited about not being in a pocket in terms of, I'm teaching 4th grade, but it's just me and one other teacher. And I'm teaching 4th grade at this school, and it's just me and one other teacher. I think that what they like, or what they've expressed to me, is they're really excited about the potential of getting together, professionally develop themselves with one another, to collaborate. And we just really believe that this is something that's going to be a very positive thing for us. We've also talked about common assessments. You know, we want to make sure that when we assess, you know, now we can't be completely sure if everything is quite as common at each school. And again, it's all about proximity. You know, when you have 3 different leaders in a particular school, proximity in terms of teachers being able to interact with each other on a daily basis, those are all things that we believe will be good for horizontal alignment. Now, I want to talk about resource allocation here just for a second. Now, I've got a couple of questions about some resource allocation. And one of the things I want to just mention that we really, really like, and that is a real concern of mine, is in the area of nursing. Now, currently at the elementary schools, that's the 3 K4s, the 5, 6, and we'll go ahead and throw the 7, 8, 9, 12 in there. We actually have, at the elementary level, we have a nurse who is splitting time at Brownwood and Nelson, and then we have one at Caldwell, and we have one at Collins, and I'll stop right there because the junior high and the high school have one. But I have a real concern here, and here's why. We have a nurse who is splitting half-time, and of course, just like most things in education, we don't get funded by the state enough to pay all of these individuals' salaries, but we have a nurse that's splitting half-time at Brownwood and Nelson. I have a real concern about that because most of our health needs are going to be down in the lower grades. And with consolidation, with one less school, we'd be able to have a nurse at every school. I'll give you an example. We had a school recently, there was an issue that we had with a child that involved them having to be taken to the hospital. And unfortunately, that was the time when one of our nurses was not able to be there. And so that child didn't have as much care as we probably would have liked. And so we would be able to do away with that. By having one less school, we'd have a full-time nurse at every school. And that's really, really exciting to me because, again, their health and safety, of course, is a concern of ours. Now, electives and specials. Now, we have right now an itinerant music and art teacher that floats between our elementary schools. Now, a concern that I have is I think that art and music are very important. I'm not sure how everyone in the community feels about that. I would think that this is important to our community. I know it's important to me because this is an outlet that we have for students that might not otherwise have an outlet. For example, we obviously are big in other things elective-wise, but I think this is an important area. Now, what happens is we have two people who do these jobs, and they go from school to school. And just basically, here's what happens. At the elementary school, a teacher will go and a student will get 30 minutes of music instruction one time a week. A student will get 30 minutes of art instruction one time a week. And again, from my standpoint, I'm not satisfied with that. I think our students have, or need rather, the opportunity to take these particular courses more than what we've been able to offer them. Now you say, well, how does this happen in terms of resource allocation? Well, here's how that happens. What happens is, if you bring all the teachers from one grade together. Now, let me just, and I'll just give you an example, not that and I've got my computer here that if I need to refer to it, but let's just say, for example, that we had 200 kindergarten students. And let's just say, for example, we had 12 teachers, okay? All right, and then let's just say that we still had those 200, and then we went down to 11 teachers. Now again, I call this stealing a teacher, is what I've told our faculties. So basically what you would see there is if you divide that and you get a number, okay, and you divide this and you get a number, basically if you'll divide that and see the average number of students in a classroom, what you'll see is the number here is not that much higher than here. So if I could steal a teacher here, that gives me one teacher who could then make a second art teacher. I could do the same thing if we had third grade, and let's just say we had 180 and we had 9 teachers, and then we get a number, and then let's say that if we stole one from there. Now again, if you do the division, that number is not that much higher, and it would be easy for that teacher to handle that particular number of students. If I stole another one, then I could have a second music teacher. Now why is that important? What that would do is that would, let's just say for example we had a first-third scenario and a 4-6 scenario. What that would do is music and art teacher full-time at this school, music and art teacher full-time at this school. Now again, this excites me. It excites me because what we're going to be able to do is to allow our kids to be exposed to music and art more than they ever have. Now another thing that we want to talk about in terms of stealing a teacher is drama. Now my thoughts on drama is this: if we're able to do this, we can steal a teacher, and if we have the 4-6 configuration, I can see in the very near future the potential of having someone teaching drama at the 4-6 school. If we had a 6-8 school, I can see that person doing that there. Because really and truly, if you think about it, if you've been to Collins, whether it's a 4-6 or a 6-8, have you ever been into the auditorium? It's an 1,182 seat auditorium, and if you think about it, how much do we really use that? Not very much. If we have drama at one of these 2 particular schools, I can envision us having plays every quarter involving, again, taking a group of kids that may not have an outlet, that this is their outlet. And I think our kids deserve that, I really do. We could also talk about computer applications. I won't go there. I will say this: intervention and EL, that's our English language learners. If we're able to bring our grades together, combine our resources, what we're going to be able to do is provide those intervention students and those EL students with the support that they need to be successful. And again, that all goes back to horizontal alignment. Now, one of the things, and I know that this is always important, and that's jobs. Now, I need you to understand a couple of quick things, that obviously nothing is a certainty, again, in education, because with the decline in students, when students goes down, state-funded units go down. So if a system is losing students, they lose state-funded units, which is how many teachers that you can employ. And basically it boils down to this. If you don't have state-funded money to pay for the teacher, you have a couple of options. You can take that on locally, which costs the system more money, or unfortunately, you may have to make a change. That's the reality of where we are in terms of jobs. However, I want to make sure that you understand configuration has nothing to do with job loss, because in terms of the teachers, because if we were to snap our fingers right now, in any scenario that we have run, that would be me and that would be our Human Resources Director, whether we stay the same, whether we go option 1, or whether we go option 2, we still earn from the state 97.79 teachers. Doesn't matter. The way we do it now, if we snapped our fingers and moved to option 1, that's where we are. If we snapped our fingers and moved to option 2, it's the same thing. So I need to make sure that people understand that in terms of our teachers, okay? Now, when we talk about, I've had this question about cost effectiveness, where we are cost effectiveness wise. Well, here's the thing. When we talk about Brownwood, since that is the school that's on that particular list to use in a different area, in the last 2 years, we have spent $65,000 to $70,000 in water, sewer, gas, and electric. Now again, now that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in reality it is. Now again, in year 1, and I'll say this another time, you have to understand this is like an investment. You're not going to see all the return in the first year. When you invest money, you do that to see returns in later years. Now, some people have asked, well, what about moving costs? Well, we will be able to recoup whatever moving costs we have by some of the savings that we'll have here. But let's move on into the future, 2, 3 years, 4 years down the road. Now, if Brownwood is used as another source for the community, obviously we would want to offset the cost of using that. It would not be something that we would want to operate at a loss. So if we use that as another way to help our community with community organizations being in those buildings, if we offset whatever costs they incur with our water, sewer, and electric, gas and have a break even, you're looking at $50,000, $60,000 a year that we could save. Now let's just estimate low. Let's just say all we saved was $40,000. Well, here's the thing. We can't think about this entire process as a today thing. It's got to be a 10, 15, 20 years down the road thing. Now I don't know about you, but 40,000 times 10, that's $400,000. It's almost $500,000. You say, well, that'll take 10 years. Well, it's still $500,000. We've talked about this. We've talked about maintenance. In the letter that I sent you, I believe I put this in the letter, 550 man-hours. For example, at Brownwood. That was an average based upon the POs, the purchase orders that we had. That's 50, I believe that was at $32 an hour. And I think if I remember correctly, that was somewhere in the $17,000 range. That's not money saved in a year, but that is money and hours that could be used at another building to make sure that it stays maintained. So we would save some money here. Technology-wise, I know this, you probably won't understand E-rate, but I will say this. E-rate, Mr. Tony LaRue, estimates that we'll save about $9,000 a year on E-rate by closing a school. You say, well, that's not a lot of money. Well, when you multiply it by 10, that's almost $100,000. Again, we're talking about the future. We're talking about the future. Now, we're talking about non-teaching positions. Let me give you an example. We also get units based upon how many students we have. And I'll give you a good example. And again, this is please, again, it's just an example, okay? Now, when some people hear this, they're going to, get a little upset or can say, it's just an example. Let me show you. Right now, one of the things that we get funded for from an administrative position is guidance counselors. This is what we earn right now. Okay? Now, if you'll see that on the board, that is our current configuration. It's just an example. We earn a half, a half, a half, a half, and a whole. So we actually earn 3.0 units. Now, what does that mean? That means the state pays us for those salaries. So basically, you can see that we actually have a full counselor at each school. And I believe that's necessary. It is. It's absolutely necessary to have a person on the campus full-time for guidance. But if we earn 3, but we pay 5, then you can see that 2.0 of those are local units. Okay, so that's where we are. Now you say, well, how much is that, Dr. Reyes? Well, if you go by the average and you go on the low end, basically we're paying over $100,000 for 2 people. That would be bachelor's degree, no years experience, but guidance counselors normally have a master's and things like that. So you're talking about somewhere, just in general, this is on the low end. Okay? That's per year. Now, why does this matter? Well, if, let's just say that we did a pre-K and K, we did a 1-3, we did a 4-6, and a 7-8. Let's say we did this one. Do you know that in state earned units, now we earn this, and we would only earn a half there. But you see immediately that we actually earn 3.5, where up here, we only earn how many? 3. So immediately you earn a half of a counselor. I mean, that's, you know, 35, 40,000, just like that, because again, you still are going to keep these people employed. We're already paying for them. But what I'm saying is this. Think about this. 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years down the road. Again, just like everyone else, one day, I hope I can retire one day. We could have somebody retire in the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Somebody's husband could get a different job. Somebody who's there the wife who's a guidance counselor may get a job. You just never can tell how this works out. But what I'm saying is this. Through time, as people retire, life change, whatever, then we don't have to worry about these 0.5s because they're all fully funded. For example, if we went to this model, and let's say, for example, one of the guidance counselors came to me and said, my husband just got a job in Las Vegas. And we've got to move. Well, if she has to move, then I go from 5 to 4. Well, how many did I get? 3.5. We're saving money. We're saving money so we can put it back into kids. Put it back into kids. So again, this is just a quick example. It might be a little bit rudimentary, but it's a quick example of how one way you can save money. But again, ladies and gentlemen, this is an investment over time. This decision is not made for just today. It's made over time. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to get a quick drink of water. We're going to talk about the future of our facilities. Now, I mentioned this at our board meeting the other day, but here's my question. And again, I'm not saying this is one I like more than the other, but I want you to think about this. If you have a pre-K and K school, okay, and let's say you had a 1-3, and let's say you had a 4-6 and a 7-8. Let's say that that's what we went to. Ladies, if y'all have another dry erase, if I can get one, please. All right, now, let's say that that's at Nelson, that's at Caldwell, that's at Collins, and that's at the junior high. All right, let's say, and then we'll go ahead and put the high school out here, okay? Let's say that this is what we do, okay? This is how we configure. Well, my question is then, what do we do 10 years down the road? What do we do 15 years down the road if the population continues to decline? Now, if it doesn't, we don't have a problem. But what if the population continues to decline? What do we need to do? What if we need to build a new school at some point in time? Again, because the decisions we make today are either going to help or hurt people that come down the road 10 or 15 years. And quite frankly, for me, I want to try to make this the most cost-effective it can be, provide the most opportunities, because I'm 46. When I get 66, I would love for my children to have children and they come back and want to live in Scottsboro because of what we can offer them. And we can offer them more together than we can apart. So this is kind of what I'm thinking. I want you to think about this. if we continue to go down population-wise, I want you to think about our buildings. I said I would talk about this. I'm going to write down some numbers. I got this right, 2005. All right. This is current buildings. Brownwood, Collins, Junior High, Nelson, High School, Caldwell. Okay? Now I want you to think about this. This was a school in both of those settings that we talked about closing. Now, again, you can check, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but in all the things that I've looked at, the average school, public school, in the United States, the average public school is somewhere around 45 years old. Okay? So you can see where, you can take those numbers, you can do that at home, and you can see how old those are. But here's what I do know. 10 years from now, do you know how much older Collins will be than it is right now? It'll be 10 more years older. In 20 years, it'll be 20 years older. Let me just give an example. Collins was built in 66, that's 34 plus 18. Today, Collins is 52 years old. In 10 years, it'll be 62 years old. 10 more years, it'll be 72 years old. And you get the picture. So how do we think about managing facilities moving forward if the population continues to go down? Well, here's the thing. If you look here, you obviously can see that these two right here are the newest, and they will stand. So the question is, where do you go with these three buildings? Now again, I'm not going to get into the hows and whys. I've got some ideas and some thoughts. I've shared those with central office staff. I've talked to administrators. But I want us to understand that whether we want to admit this or not, the future is going to come, whether we want to or not. So we've got to, in terms of future planning, facilities management, we've got to ask ourselves, where are we going to go with these three buildings? Because quite frankly, if population continues to decline, we may have to go to 4 buildings 10 years down the road. Now again, I would say this, in terms of even a discussion of building any new schools, what we cannot do is currently right now, we have debt service that we pay every single year on the Caldwell building, the high school building, the field house. So we have some debt that we're paying until 2032. And people might look at that number and say, well, that's a long time. Well, if you've lived any length of time, you know that 14 years goes just like that. Matter of fact, I was in high school a few days ago. That's how fast it's gone. But 14 years will be gone just like that. Now, in 14 years, all these buildings will be 14 years older. So again, what do we do? I think that's a conversation that we need to start having. Because again, it certainly is my desire to stay here for quite a while. And what I want to do is I want to help whoever comes in after me make this place a better place by making good, solid decisions now. So again, we could have some more conversation about that. I'd love to sit down. If anybody wants to stop by, I'd love to sit down and hear your ideas on 10, 15 years down the road in terms of where we might be facilities-wise. Now, I want to write a word up here. Here's how to make sure I can spell it right. Did I get that right? Anxiety. Do I need to get a new marker? Okay. All right, talking about anxiety. Now, I've heard this quite a bit in terms of our students. Now, let me say this, and again, I'm not talking to you as a superintendent right now, I'm just talking to you as a parent. What I understand about anxiety, I mean, fortunately, I've been able to be a K through 12 administrator. So I understand anxiety. I understand anxiety from a secondary student's level. I understand it from a kindergartner's level. I tell you what, one of the hardest things that you do is when a kindergartner comes to school for the first time, some of them are a little anxious about it. I understand that. And I've had some people ask me, well, what if they have to leave the kindergarten and go straight to first grade? Well, a lot of people have done that. I've actually done that myself. I went to AmeriKid, the kindergarten down by the movies, and then as soon as I left AmeriKid, I went to Brownwood. So I did that. My brother did that. Not that that's right for everybody, but it can be done. Now, what I want to say about anxiety is this. It is my belief in the 22 years that I've been in education is that for the most part, now not every time, but for the most part, kids are as anxious as their parents allow them to be. Now, here's what I mean by that. I know this. I knew there were very few times ever in my life that I was worried at home because I never saw my mother and father become anxious. If there was an issue, if there was a problem, they never showed it, and because I felt like that they were comfortable with where we were, I felt comfortable. So I would say about anxiety, if we do make a change, be positive with your kid. If you're positive with your kid about any changes, they're going to be more positive. But if we as parents, and I include myself in this, if I'm negative about a situation, then that certainly is going to make my child negative as well. So again, I want you to understand, we understand that this is a big change. We understand that. We understand that there are some children that may be a little anxious. But if we will, as a group of parents, if we will stay positive, I assure you that our kids can get through this. I have no doubt that our kids can do that. Now, about to wrap it up, and I may not have answered every question. I certainly tried my best. I don't know how long we've been going, maybe about 20 or 30 minutes. I hope you've stayed with me for the entirety of this process. If you have any questions, if you have any concerns, I think that every person that sent me an email, I believe that I've personally answered that email. And if I didn't, let me apologize, but I've tried to answer. I've been really, really pleased with the positive comments that we've had from parents and from teachers. I've also been very pleased with the concerns that have been shared with me because, again, everything that we're doing, if there's a concern, I want you to let me know so that I can try my best to try to help you understand where we're going. But I will say this, in all this process, what we're talking about is how can we provide the most opportunity to the most students. Also, how do we maximize our financial resources? That's also another area that we wanted to focus on. How do we adapt to the changing world around us? And let's be quite honest, our world here in Scottsboro has changed. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. You'll always hear me say this. I'm not making a value judgment on where we are. I just know we are where we are, and now we've got to adapt to those changes. And we can either, and I've said this, we can either do nothing or we can do something. And I think the time for us to do something is now. I said this in all my community meetings. Everybody wants things to get better, but nobody wants things to change. And so we're going to have to change. We're going to have to do something to change to try to make our education system better. And then I would leave you with this. The facts are the facts. I can't change the numbers when we look at population. I can't change that. The facts are the facts. But what I would ask people to do is you can change your perspective. We can take a bad situation or a good situation and we can completely flip-flop it by our perspective. My perspective is, yes, we've lost students, but as I've said several times, my perspective is that I believe that our best days still lie ahead. And I believe that with all my heart. And I appreciate you listening to me, and I apologize if I'm getting a little choked up. But I love the black and gold. I still believe in them. And I believe our better days are ahead. And I hope that you'll embark on this journey with me and support us, because I believe it's best for all of our kids in the Scottsboro City School System. Thank you for listening. And if you ever need me, you shoot me an email, you give me a call, and I'll do my very best to get back to you. Go Wildcats.